We support our law enforcement partners, and we're working to reduce crime and put dangerous offenders behind bars. At the same time, we want to ensure that those who enter the justice system are able to contribute to their communities after they leave prison, which is one of many very difficult subjects we're discussing.
That was the president last hour on prison reform. It's a big focus of the meeting, at least that we were able to hear. Ways to reduce recidivism, returning to crime after people have been punished for it. But that's not the only issue to focus on for reform. There's also the concern of for-profit prisons and what that does for incarceration rates. Today's meeting comes nearly a year after Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded an Obama-era order to phase out private prisons. So let's take a look at prisons and private prisons in the United States. This is the most heavily incarcerated country in the world. There are currently more than 2 million Americans behind bars, more than any other country. And this includes people locked up in state, local, and private prisons. Now, of this number, 2.1 million, more than 128,000 are held in private facilities, not government facilities. And keeping all these individuals locked up means huge business for private prisons. According to one estimate, for-profit prisons are a $5 billion industry. There are two major for-profit prison companies in the United States, CoreCivic and the Geo Group. Combined, the two manage the overwhelming majority of private prison contracts in the United States. Now, we should note both companies donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Trump campaign. For more on private prisons and reform, I'm joined by Lauren-Brooke Eisen, senior counsel at NYU's Brennan Center for Justice. She's also the author of Inside Private Prisons. I got it right here, An American Dilemma in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me on the show today.
I kind of think, and I've never been able to get my head out of this, that prisons for profit is a perverse incentive. I'm a business journalist. I think that there should be lots of things for profit. But if you're profiting off of prisons, you're benefiting from there being more people in prisons for a longer amount of time.
Well, that's exactly what this book explores. It explores the history of mass incarceration, the history of the privatization of the justice system. And you're right, you just spoke about those figures. You know, today we have about 8% of incarcerated individuals at the state level in these private prisons, about 18% at the federal level. And something that a lot of your viewers might be very surprised at is that 65% of immigrant detainees in Department of Homeland Security detention centers are actually in private facilities. Right. And that's a huge boon to the private prison industry under the Trump administration.
So the government argues, people who are proponents of private prisons say they're efficient. If you run it on a profit motive, they'll run it for less money, and the government doesn't pay as much to incarcerate people.
And that's what this book explores. So the book looks at the promise, the sort of great hope that the private prison industry in the mid-1980s said that they would do, that they would innovate, that they would do a better job than the government would do.
They'd be better places for less money.
We've always had lousy recidivism rates in this country.
Right.
You know, today, about 3/4 of people who leave prison are going to return within 3 years.
Wow.
That's a pretty lousy rate.
Right.
So the private prison industry came in and they said, you know what? About 3/4 of states in the mid-1980s were under some sort of federal court order to reduce prison populations, and they said, we can do it better than the government can. But 4 decades later, we haven't seen that innovation, we haven't seen that promise, and we haven't seen that cost savings. And it's something that we really need to be vigilant about, that the Trump administration is increasing its reliance on the private prison industry.
Is there anything about the private prison industry that incentivizes judges to send people to prison who otherwise wouldn't go to prison, or sentence them for longer than they would?
Well, there have been some cases where judges, there's one pretty well-known case in Pennsylvania where the juvenile court judge did receive some incentives and was paid to actually send juvenile defendants.
I remember a story of some kid who was shoplifting on his first offense and got sentenced to jail.
And there were multiple juveniles that he sent to a private juvenile detention center. And you know, while that case might be an outlier, it really gets at the incentives, right? When we talk about government prisons, there is no incentive, right? Because there's no corporation behind it.
If you're doing it this way, there's somebody profiting from having people in jail.
Exactly.
All right. Good story. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. We'll continue to follow the developments in privatization of prisons. Lauren-Brooke Eisen is a senior counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice and the author of Inside Private Prisons, An American Dilemma in the Age of